Once again, I'm Ashley Force.
And I'm Laura Finelli. As we've been telling you throughout the night, New Jersey still needs your help. However, we weren't the only state that felt Sandy's wrath. New York City was just as devastating, with places like Staten Island and Breezy Point being destroyed.
Joining us now is Professor Jonathan Mason, who is using his own creative resources to help restore New York. Thank you, Professor Mason, for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Can you explain to us a little bit about what Care for Sandy is?
Sure. So Care for Sandy it's an organization, a volunteer organization that pools the resources of creatives, especially like Photoshop artists and graphic designers all over the world, really, to help restore photos that were destroyed during Hurricane Sandy in New Jersey and in the tri-state area. Yeah, and we have volunteers from all over the world basically helping with it.
Can you tell us the general process that these photos go through once they reach you?
Sure, yeah. So the first step is sort of we go out to an area that was hit by the storm, and we show up with flatbed scanners and set up a tent, and families can bring a box of photos, and we scan them at a very high resolution. And then those go back to this database that we have, and we have a list of volunteers that we've sort of vetted based on their experience with photo retouching. And then they'll pick a photo that they want to restore, and then we give them a certain amount of time to restore that photo. So we send them the file, they import it into whatever program they're using, usually Photoshop, and it could be anything from just removing a couple scratches here and there, or the emulsion of the photo might have gotten washed away by seawater, or seashells might sort of collapse on a photo album. But basically, and then the more damaged photos require heavy reconstruction. So sometimes the entire face or a body part in the photo might be completely missing, in which case they have to use other photos of the subject and sort of composite them. So it can go from a very simple process to a very sort of complex, time-consuming process.
Now, is this an example of a picture that you guys might receive that needs to be retouched?
Yeah, so this one is from, the photo was taken in the 60s, and that little girl there is now a grown woman, and her family owned that bar, that diner, Gallagher's Restaurant. So she had that photo, it's one of her precious childhood memories.
Yeah.
And that actual Gallagher's Restaurant was hit by the storm. So that's the photo that I retouched, and you can sort of tell there's a lot of tearing of the photo and a lot of sort of junk between seawater and sometimes sewage and all kinds of disgusting stuff that the photos encounter, and so this would be considered sort of a low intermediate level retouching job.
Yeah. How long do you think it took you to restore that particular photo? That
photo took me probably, it's hard to say because like most volunteers, I'm doing this when I'm not at my real job, right? So I did it over the course of several months in sessions going from 2 to 6 hours at a time. I'd say total this is maybe like 30 hours worth of work. And again, this is not the most difficult. There are people way more experienced than I am who are putting in way more time restoring photos. So it's a very time-consuming process, yeah.
Now, I know CARE mainly focuses on restoring photos for Sandy victims. Do you think in the future CARE could help other disastrous photos that come in?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think when we started, we certainly didn't think about creating an organization. That wasn't the goal. The goal was sort of to go back on your first question. So my friend Lee Kelly, who sort of started this whole thing, it all started when she was reading the paper after the hurricane, and she read this touching story about this woman from Breezy Point who had lost all of her photos, and someone had found her wedding photos. And the article was about someone trying to track her down and give her these photos, get these photos back to her, right? There's a lot of this sort of missing photos kind of things going on. And so they finally got it back to her, and she, and my friend, when she read this article, thought, she got the photo back, but it's still damaged, and I'm good at retouching photos, why don't I reach out to her? And she did, and she got the photo and she restored it, and then she sort of had the idea, well, why don't we reach out to more people. So it snowballed from there and got bigger and bigger, and now it's gotten to a point where the idea is to no longer make it Care for Sandy, but just make it CARE, a Cherished Albums restoration effort. So that anytime there's an event like this, we have a system to sort of help people preserve, you know, precious memories, right? Photos are sort of, you ask a lot of people what's the one thing they would take with them in the event of a disaster, and you know, photo albums tend to be up there on the list.
So if you had to say one thing to make people more inclined to volunteer and donate to restore the shore, what would you say?
I think the interesting thing about an organization like CARE is that it might help to remind people that you don't have to be necessarily directly affected by the storm, and you also don't necessarily have to have what you might think are the specific skills needed in a restoration effort. You don't have to be a carpenter. You don't have to know anything about electricity. You don't, you know, you could be in Moscow or in, you know, Sydney, Australia, and say, I just want to help people who've been sort of hit by these natural disasters, and I want to help. So I would say there's never too small a donation, and there's never too little you can do. There's always an opportunity to sort of chip in and use your skills, whatever they might be. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, and I'm so glad at least one thing good came out of Sandy. Thank you so much for being here today.